All right. As I told some of you, anybody who doesn't get all the answers right at the end has to wash all the cars. So I'm going to make it easy for you. Here are the questions. And all you got to do is remember the answers. If you're under 21, you ought to get one of these. There's a couple more.
Wait, do the little thing?
Yeah, Nate?
I have an extra.
Annie needs one. Annie's driving now. Annie needs one. Okay. First of all, yep.
You have enough?
Yep. Ellie, would you give that to Uncle Joe? Thank you. What's the interstate highway system? Jack. Those are the questions.
It's a system
I don't have a
of
phone.
highways throughout the entire country.
Very good. And what's special about them?
They are maintained by federal taxes.
Very good. Okay, what else is special about them? Let me give you a hint. You've been on Highway 83 lots of times, right? And you've been on I-94 lots of times. What's the difference between the two highways? Annie.
I know that the highways go like way farther than like the interstate highway.
Yeah, okay. Basically, yes, Rose.
They're different numbers.
Different numbers, okay. It's called restricted access. If you think about I-94, you think about I-83, you're crossing Highway VV, or you're crossing any highway, you just make a right turn or a left turn and you go on a different highway, right? But when you're on an interstate highway, what do you have to do? You have to get an off-ramp, you have to get an on-ramp. That's called limited access. That's the biggest difference between the interstate highway system and other highways. Now, any idea whose idea, the first, who came up with the idea of an interstate system? Nick.
Eisenhower,
Why?
because it was to transport military units across the country very quickly.
Very good. And actually what happened right after World War I in 1919, the government wanted to see how difficult it would be. We basically shipped a lot of stuff from the eastern ports over to Europe. And the question was, how long would it take to ship men and materials, cannon, all that, across the country if we had to fight a war within our boundaries? And so the Army set up basically a trek. And they decided they were going to go from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco with 81 Army transport vehicles just to see how long it would take. Anyone want to guess what the average miles per hour was? This is 1919. 6 miles an hour. It took 62 days. And Eisenhower was lieutenant colonel in one of the transport convoys. He went on kind of as a lark just to see what it was like. And he made some notes and basically said, this is a disaster. I mean, there's no way you can make it. Bridges would cave in when they would bring tanks across. Roads were gone. Hardly any of it was paved. So it stuck in the back of his mind. Now fast forward 1943, 44, 45. He's leading the Allies as the European commander in World War II. He gets over to Germany, and what does he see there? The Autobahn. Anyone know what the Autobahn is? Annie.
Like basically the same thing in Germany, but like a really fast highway system.
Yep, it's a limited access, and Hitler built it primarily so he could move the army across Germany quickly and effectively. Like Annie said, they're very wide, very limited access. I drove them on it once, and I was doing 100 miles an hour, and people were passing me. It gives you some idea how fast you're supposed to go on these things. So Eisenhower, in 1919, crosses the country at 6 miles an hour with this convoy. 30 years later, he's in Europe, and he sees what Germany can do with regard to fast systems. He becomes president in 1952, and he says, I'm going to do something about it. Took him about 4 years, but he founded the interstate highway system through an act of Congress. Now, there's a numbering sequence in the interstate system. Anybody want to guess what the even numbered highways mean? You're going from across the country, and you have even numbered highways like Interstate 94, Interstate 90, Interstate 10. Jack.
East-west.
East-west. Very good. They go this way. What about the odd numbered? Gabe.
North to south.
Very good. All right. The odd numbers go this way. Okay. Now, not only do the even numbers go this way and the odd numbers go this way, but there's a plan in terms of the numbering sequence. Now, the lowest number interstate highway going east and west is Interstate 10. The highest number is Interstate 94. Where would they be in the United States? Gabe.
At the ends.
Nope, nope. Close. Paul.
Interstate 10 is at the southern border.
Interstate 10 is down here. Interstate 20, 30. How many of you been through Indianapolis? Like 7 million times? Interstate 70 goes this way. How about Interstate 80? Where does that go? Chicago, right through here and on up through Ohio and Indiana. Luke and Allie and Nick took it yesterday when they came across this way. Interstate 90, right through here. Interstate 94, right through Milwaukee. Starts up in Montana and goes this way. So the interstate highway system for the even numbers go east and west, and the lowest number is down here, and it keeps increasing as you go this way. What about the odd numbers system? Where would Interstate 1 be? Where would Interstate 95 be? It's a trick question. Interstate 1. Rose.
There is no Interstate 1?
There is. It's in Hawaii. And Interstate 3 is in Hawaii. Interstate 5 is right here. Interstate 95 is right here. Okay, so the odd number highways go north-south, and the lowest number is over here. The highest number goes this way. Interstate 5 goes right along California. Interstate 15, for those who go to Vegas, goes right through Vegas. Interstate 25 through Denver. Interstate 35 through Kansas. Interstate 55, where does that go?
Chicago.
Chicago. Interstate 65. Indianapolis. Interstate 75. Ohio. Since Ohio, yeah, basically from Cincinnati all the way up to Cleveland. Interstate 95.
We know where that is.
Hugs right over here, okay? So, if you look at it, you probably won't see the numbers, but here's 10. Here's 40, 70, 80, 90. And then the green are the north-south, 5, 15, 25, 35, 55, 65, 75, 95. Okay? Now, why would they do it that way? The reason they did was because this was done in the 50s. The states had built their own highway system in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and it was kind of haphazard. Some didn't even have numbers. Some had names, like the Roosevelt Highway, the Washington Highway. But generally, the highest number north-south highways were over here, like Highway 101, it was right up California. So the federal government said, to avoid confusion, we're going to start numbering the vertical highways, the lowest number in California, and go this way, so that you wouldn't have like an I-24 and a Highway 24 and an I-48 and a State 48, so there wouldn't be no confusion. Then in fact, I think there's only 3 places in the country where you have a State Highway 24 and the Interstate Highway 24 actually matching. So that's why the numbering system started here and went that way. And the same with the lower number, the even number systems went this way. Okay?
Okay.
Now, thank you, Charlie.
Hey, Grandpa. I have a question paper.
You got it right there.
Okay.
Okay, so that explains the numbering system. But you notice they're all how many digits? 2. But a lot of interstate highways have 3 digits. And it's that first digit that means something. So, any guesses? How many? First of all, give me an interstate highway that's got 3 digits.
894.
894, another one.
275.
275.
736.
794.
Okay, now there's a difference between 894 and 794. What's the difference? Besides that one is even and one is odd. Grace.
If it's the even number, if the first digit is even, that means it comes back around to the highway that it circumvents.
Very good.
An odd number, it doesn't come back to the expressway.
I don't have enough for everybody, but this will explain what Grace just said.
Thank you.
Awesome.
You always need something to explain what Grace just said.
All right.
Oh, you're recording.
Okay. Take a look at this. Now, a couple things on the map. First of all, find I-94 on the west side. Remember we said I-94 runs generally, even number of highways run generally east and west, except when you get to Milwaukee, I-94 goes from Milwaukee south to Chicago. Why? Because cars can't float and you can't get across Lake Michigan in a car. That's the only reason. It just jogs down and then it keeps going east and west again. Okay? Now, look at I-43. I-43, you can see the end of it over here. It starts in Beloit, Wisconsin, and it generally goes north-south, comes through Milwaukee, and goes up all the way to Green Bay. In fact, it may even go a little further north than that. So it's an odd-numbered system, and it goes north-south. Now, look at what I highlighted in yellow. As Grace said, 894 goes around the city of Milwaukee, but the thing is, it connects back again with I-94 right around the Milwaukee airport. Now, Paul said 794. The thing with it, if the first digit is an odd digit, it never gets back to the interstate again. So if you take 794, what you do is you go into downtown Milwaukee, and as you go along the lakefront, 794 goes toward the airport, but it never hooks up again with I-94. It just dead ends into a regular highway system. So 894 goes around what city?
Milwaukee.
Very good. Around Milwaukee. What about 294? What city does that go around?
Chicago.
275. Hey, 270.
Columbus.
All right. So every time you have an even number
Hey, champs.
as the first digit of 3, that means if you stay on it, you're going to wind up back at the original interstate. If it's an odd number, it won't. Now, Matt found I-394 a few years ago, and you start from south of Chicago and you take 394, and it takes you into the western suburbs, but it just dead ends there. Okay? That's it.
So why is there like different numbers? So like there's 2 and 8, like what is that, does that delegate anything?
That's a good question. Like
Oh.
294, there's 8, like what?
Great question, because if you can only really have I-94 starts in the West Coast and goes all the way to Boston, and it hits a lot of cities. And so what they try to do is to make sure that that number isn't replicated. So you could have 894 around Milwaukee. If you had 894 around Chicago, people would get confused. So they simply tried to separate them.
Okay.
So a 294 versus 894 doesn't mean anything.
Mean nothing at all, just to eliminate the confusion.
Just placed in the United States.
Right.
Okay.
Like 270. Well, what's the one that goes around Indianapolis? That's
465.
465. That's a bad example. But basically, that's it. The only significance of that first digit is whether it's odd or even.
Well, it's because like 270 goes around Columbus and then 670 goes around Dayton.
That's it. That's another good example. You just didn't want to use the same number. Okay, so just to recap, the interstate highway system. Oh, by the way, the interstate highway system is not just limited access, but when it was built, it had very strict requirements because the federal government said we're going to pay 90% of the cost of the highway. The state only has to pay 10%. But like everything else the government does, it says you got to play by our rules. Number one, the lanes have to be 12 foot wide. The shoulders have to be 10 foot wide. You can't have a grade more than 6%. Unless you get special permission, like if you're going through the mountains. The bridges are all 16.5 foot high. Any idea why?
So they could transport nukes.
So they could transport nukes. They had atomic cannons in the 50s and they had to move them from one city to another. You probably remember they used to put some of the ICBMs, the ballistic missiles, in silos, but they also were afraid the Russians were going to figure out where they were, so they put a lot of them just on shuttles and they kept moving them around from city to city. And they had to make sure they could get them from one city to another city, so all the bridges had to give you at least 16.5 foot height clearance. Joe?
Isn't also 1 in every 5 miles has to be straight with no bridges so they can...
It's an urban legend. There used to be it's a legend that says there's got to be a 5-mile stretch so you can land an airplane. There's no truth to that one. But it was a pretty strong rumor. Okay, interstate highway system, limited access, started in '56 by Eisenhower. It was supposed to be $1 million a mile. The cost, it went way, way over that, as usual. There's about 50,000 miles of interstate highway system right now. 12 lane width, which is going to be interesting because when they expand I-94 from Waukesha to the lakefront, in order so that they don't have to interrupt those cemeteries right around 60th Street, they're going to shrink the lanes to 11 feet. So they got to get special permission to do that. That way they don't have to take more cemetery land to do it. 16.5 foot clearance, 10 foot shoulders, limited access. And basically it's one on and off ramp for every 3 miles. And obviously in the cities it's a lot closer than that. The east-west numbering system are even, north-south they're odd, and the low numbers start on the west end and go east. The low numbers on the east-west start here and go north. One last comment. How many of you have seen those little mile markers on the freeways? And what do they mean? They mark miles, obviously. Okay. But where do they start measuring? So let's say you're building the interstate highway from La Crosse to Milwaukee. It's I-94. Where do you start? Where's mile number 1? Where's mile number 348? You got to decide which way you want to start counting. Grace.
Start from the west state line.
Why? Why would you start from the west?
Because then it's the same as the progression of the interstate.
Exactly. That's the whole secret. So you start here, you start the mile markers for I-94 in Wisconsin. Mile marker number 1 is in La Crosse, and it goes this way. So if you remember when you head toward Illinois, the mile markers for I-94 are 344, 348, 350. And then you're in Illinois. And then you start the mile marking system over again because now you're crossing in another state. Same with I-75. It goes from Cincinnati to Cleveland. Where's mile marker number 1 on I-75? Down in Cincinnati, and it goes up progressively up until it gets up to Cleveland. And it's a great set. It follows the same rationale. If you're going to start numbering the east-west highways from the west, you do the same thing. And the same token, when you're looking at putting the mile markers on the north-south highways, you start from the southern boundary of each state. And the last thing is that the exit numbers then, for exit number 34, exit number whatever, exactly matches the mile marker. So if you're at mile marker 28 and you need to get off at mile marker 38 or exit 38, how many miles do you have to go? Joe?
I wasn't listening.
Gabe got it.
Gabe?
10.
All right, 10.
Wow.
Might hit her leg. I thought Abby just got stung by a bee. I'm sorry.
Now, interesting, when they started putting the exits in, that requirement wasn't necessarily there. If you've been through Georgia, you know what they did, Georgia being Georgians, they started marking the exits from the Florida-Georgia border. So the first exit was number 1, and it didn't matter where it was. It could have been 15 miles from the Florida line, could have been 5 miles. It was the first exit, it's exit number 1. The next exit is exit number 2. What happens if the city starts to build up and they decide to add another exit? It's a whoops. It's exit 1A or exit 2B. So finally, about 20 years ago, the federal government said, get your act together. And if any of you travel through Georgia in the, I think it was late 80s, early 90s, it was total chaos because motels, restaurants had all their marketing stuff marked up with, hey, we're at exit 20, and all of a sudden it was exit 37 or 38 or what have you. They had to change all the marking systems to match the mile markers. That's it. Thanks.